All right, we got the YCS Vegas tier list, guys. It's been overdue. I needed to get this video out for a while. Apologies for the lack of uploads lately, but I went on vacation and I got engaged. I don't have a ring, she does, but I got engaged, and so kind of been focusing all around that and some, life stuff. So I haven't really had the time to upload, but YCS Vegas is just around the corner. And we got to talk about the decks and what we think is going to be good. I'm trying to give you guys some guidance if you're looking to play Tengu plant format in that 3v3. We're going to kind of work with that. And so the first thing to acknowledge is we actually have, some data from last year. And one thing we learned that was kind of an absolute truth, which I did pseudo predict, is plants and agents were the decks that saw the most play by far, right? And I always talk about this when we talk about inexperienced players, right? What they're going to do is they're going to default to one of these two decks, right? Like this is so common with newer Tengu players. They're going to default to this, and they are reasonably safe. They're also the most popular decks in the format, right? Like they're strong, they're popular. It's a very high chance you're going to see heavy representation for this, right? And I think my experience with YCS Vegas is 99% of my matches I was playing against one of these two decks. I think I played against like Gravekeepers once, and I played against some weird stuff as our team did worse, right? But for the most part, the experience for most people was everyone was playing plants and agents, right? And so with that in mind, that's where I wanted to kind of make this tier list and talk about decks that I think have potential in this tournament. And keeping in mind the fact that we kind of know the absolute truth, which is most people are going to be on this. So what decks are going to be good in that type of meta, right? Like what decks are actually stronger? So I have a few tiers, and we'll kind of break it down. The first one is the potentially best deck in the room. These are the decks that I actually think have very high potential to be very strong in the YCS Vegas meta, where again we're seeing mostly these two decks. Reasonably safe, that is the tier where again, like, you probably will be fine playing these decks. Strong versus inexperienced are decks that I think get a bit stronger when playing against people that don't know the format very well. Potentially strong, exactly as it sounds, right? Like these are decks that I think could be good, but we don't really know for sure, right? Spicy but risky is a deck that I think has the potential to be strong, but is more like basically more risky than, like, probably a higher risk than the reward, right? Mid tier is just a deck that I think is just okay, or probably on the weaker side. And then weak is weak, right? It's fairly easy to understand. So we're gonna start this right off, and the first thing I want to talk about is if you are thinking about playing plants or agents at the event. And so the one thing I'm going to say is, like, again, I always think these decks, and I put them in the reasonably safe category. They are safe decks, right? They should perform fine for you, right? The only thing that I personally have gripes with these decks when looking into the event is I don't want to play mirror matches all day. And I think, like, for example, I think the agent mirror match has so many things that just swing it in like awful ways. Like, for example, like, you have to summon your Hyperion first, so you banish like a Venus, and maybe you're playing against agents and they haven't resolved Venus yet, so they can like tour guide, steal your Venus, get a Gachi, banish your Venus again for their own Hyperion. Some crazy things can happen in that mirror match, and it feels very swingy, and I don't really like depending on luck to win, so I prefer to kind of come up with better meta calls that can deal with these decks. So big things for like this is you need a deck that can, like, like, agents rely heavily on monster effects. It's a primary monster deck, very few spells and traps. So this is a deck that relies on monster effects. So decks that can effectively turn off those monster effects or play around those monster effects are going to be strong in my eyes. And then with plants, it's going to be like, this deck relies heavily on special summoning and also kind of monster effects, but mostly, like, I don't know. Plants is kind of a weird deck where it's just kind of like a neutral. I don't actually think plants is like crazy. I just think it can look crazy, right? So like, but like, we want to kind of target these weaknesses. The one thing I know that plants really struggle with is going to be rivalry and Gozen. Plants cannot play under those two floodgates, and so keeping that in mind, like effect negation and then like rivalry goes in for these two decks, that's what's going to kind of, I guess, influence my decision of what decks I think could be like, you know, potentially the best deck or like pretty strong in this format. So that's what we're going to kind of lead with. And so starting off, we're going to talk about Naturia. And the list I have on my website, which I'll show, is not really the list I'm going to base this off. I'm actually going to base this off of Amazing Mike Man's list, which is like, he doesn't actually main the Bamboo Shoot. He plays around Naturia and then like goes for like Vanity's Fiend as the main tribute summon in the deck, using like Gigantes and stuff. And that build is actually pretty strong. Like I actually think it has some potential because Vanity's Fiend is very, very good into both of these decks, right? So I think there's actually some merit to that, because then what he does is you side into Bamboo Shoot for when going against the back row oriented decks, which is very good because like it kind of like, you know, Bamboo Shoot cooks heroes, for example. Like heroes only out to Bamboo Shoot is honest, which is fairly problematic, right? So I think that Naturia actually has some potential going into this tournament, specifically if we're talking about like again, Amazing Mike Man's build. Morphtronics, I'm going to put in spicy but risky. I mean, I do think the deck can be kind of crazy. Like it has the potential to go off. It has pretty nasty combos in Tengu format, and it also can like plus out of its mind. I kind of consider it similar to White Sworn. It's like kind of a high roll deck, right? If you're lucky, like in literally rolling high with like self on and stuff, this deck actually can pop off pretty hard. But is it strong enough like to go through like probably like, you know, let's say 8 rounds of playing against Plants and Agents? Probably not. You know, I don't know. Again, I don't know if it's worth the risk, but you know, if you like this deck, I wouldn't say like you can't play it, right? Like it'd be unplayable. Harpies, this deck is very weak, very weak. I mean, in general, it has never been strong in Tengu, but the most part, like, the nice thing about it is it's like good into back row decks, but I don't think back row decks are going to be the common thing you're going to run into, so this is going to be weaker. Relinquish, this is kind of just like, it's like Piper Chaos, but worse. I think the deck's fairly mid. We'll put it in mid. I don't think it's necessarily weak, because it does have like Piper Chaos qualities, which, you know, Piper Chaos is kind of strong, but yeah, I don't think it's great. Now, Amazons, this deck, I mean, we have to, I don't think I could put it above mid. I mean, it's kind of like spicy. Like, the thing that Amazons have is they main deck a lot of hand control, so they have like, you know, at least the build I put on the website, it's like abusing Chainmaster to like steal monsters out of your opponent's hand. That's actually very good into agents, like stealing their Hyperions, their BLSs, stuff like that. The deck itself just isn't very functional. Like, I mean, it's functional, it's just not very good. And so I don't think it's like, I don't think it really has a lot of merit in this tournament. Ancient Gear, this deck, I always put it like, I think it's like okay. You could say like potentially strong if you find a right build for it. The main reason why I say this is because Ancient Gear Beast is actually phenomenal versus Plants. Like, it actually cooks. Like, most of Plants are like floaters, like they're relying on Tengu, they're relying on like, you know, Sangan searches, stuff like that. So with like proper control around, like, you know, with like good back row and like an Ancient Gear Beast, you can probably go a long way. The issue with it is gonna be that agent matchup. Like, I don't know how that matchup would go, and Ancient Gear Beast kind of loses a bit of value in the agent matchup. So it has potential if you want to tamper with it. I don't think it's like terrible, but I don't know how like insane it is, right? Chaos, this is like pure chaos, and honestly I don't even think it's that bad. Like, I think most chaos variants, like, I think the build I have on the site is like fairly outdated. Like, this is the one that like topped like, or like won YCS Kansas City or something like that, which like it was designed to beat Tengu Plants, and I think like by nature, like it has that potential, and I don't think it's like terrible into agents either. So like I could see it actually being a decent deck, so I'll put it reasonably safe, but you know, probably updating the build is going to be your best bet. Salvo Chaos I think is weak. It's just, it doesn't have nearly as much value as this. Black Wings, I'll put in potential, I'll put in spicy but risky. Blackwings, I actually have been tampering with Blackwings and Tengu a bit myself. Some of the cards that I've been messing with is like Gen X Ally Birdman. The reason why is because you can do kind of cool things where, like, for example, you summon a Blizzard, bring back a Bora, you bounce the Bora with Gen X Ally Birdman, and then you can like re-special summon that Bora with things like Zephyros and stuff. There's like weird like combos that can come out, and then I think Dad is still like a really powerful card, which kind of makes it okay. Now, Vayu Turbo, on the other hand, this has actually seen some success in Tengu Plant format. This is, like, I don't think it's terrible, and I'm going to put it in potentially strong. One of the reasons why I think this deck, like, could be really good is because of viruses. I'll actually put it up above these guys. I think Deck Devastation Virus, like, you know, we see it in Edison. I think it is very strong in Tengu as well. It kind of cooks Tengu plants pretty hard. And then I think it's still pretty decent into agents, where you turn off their Earths, their tour guides. They lose like half their normal summons. All they get is like Venus and a Shine Ball, which is like okay. But if you can like break a lot of their hand out, then their Trags kind of lose value. And it gives you like, you know, the hand information, which I think is pretty good. Or I guess technically, and I guess this is another thing to think about, is like with YCS Vegas specifically, this is another thing I was going to mention with Amazons as well. You don't actually have to show your hand for things like Mind Crush and stuff like that. Like, you just discard, which is kind of lame because that's not how it was in Tengu format, but that's something to keep in mind. This is also where agents get a bit stronger in this format as well, because of the fact that you get like Mind Crush and like Trap Dust Shoot Mind Crush is like a common side into agents because they always have a big hand, so you can like see their hand with any of them and then like play around what they're gonna do. However, in this scenario, that is not necessarily the case, outside of obviously the Trap Dust Shoot. So that's something to keep in mind. But Deck Devi has a lot of potential to kind of clear out a lot of the cards in agents' hands, make them have less to work with. They're forced to work with only boss monsters, and you have back row and stuff like that. There's some potential there. So I do think Vayu Turbo can be good. Vayu Turbo also can like OTK decks out of nowhere. I don't think this deck is bad. Crystal Beast, I think, is weak. I always say this: when in doubt, if you got a bad archetype, put scraps in it. But, you know, just play scraps at that point. So in this scenario, like, if you want to play Crystal Beast for fun, casually with your friends, go for it. But I don't think you should play it at the event if you're trying to win. Lightsworn. Honestly, I think Lightsworn's reasonably safe. I think this deck, like, typically in Tengu tournaments, when I see it get played, the deck kind of performs. Like, I don't actually see this deck, like, get dumpstered a lot. You know, like, I think it actually is fairly decently strong. And especially, I think, in a format where there's less back row decks and you're playing against, like, you know, just plants and agents. Obviously, Valor or, like, Herald of Orange Light has its merit of, like, what, you know, like, what you could get cooked by. But, like, with all the cards that Lightsworn uses to, like, set up prior, like, you even have, like, plant engines and stuff, I think this deck could be fine. Monarchs, let's see. Honestly, I think Monarchs are also reasonably safe. I don't think they're, like, crazy good. Honestly, I think this deck is a bit weaker. Maybe I'll move it to potentially strong, but on the higher tier. Like, I don't think this deck is like a bad, like, it's like a bad call or like a bad deck. But I don't think it's like as safe in this meta. The main reason why is because of Herald of Orange Light. If you're playing against a lot of decks that run it and you tribute for a Monarch and they Orange Light you, you kind of lose all tempo. And all Monarchs really do is a single summon per turn, right? They're kind of almost like gadgets, right? And so if that's getting interrupted, which it easily can, it's like not ideal. And then also you don't really have a good way to deal with Christia outside of like Soul Exchange or something like that. And so, yeah, this deck can kind of like crack under Christia pretty hard. So I don't know how I feel about it in this meta specifically. Flamvel Sworn, I'm just going to put spicy but risky. I think Flamvel variants are very weak compared to like Jurax. I think Jurax are just like the better version of Flamvel in this format. Aliens are definitely weak. They're not that good. And then this is like the floater, like zombies. Now, I'm gonna put it in. I kind of want to put it in spicy. The only reason why is like Zombie World actually is like not terrible versus agents, right? Like if you turn off their fairies, they don't have Hyperion pops. They can only like summon Hyperion, but like if you like, you know, there's cards like Marionette Might and stuff, you can steal their stuff. Kind of cool. Maybe with like a more updated version of like that type of zombie list, it could be good. I don't know. Spicy but risky is where I'll leave it. Let's see. Volcanic Heroes. I'm gonna put in potentially strong. I mean, I think hero variants are actually like fairly decent in a meta where it's like mostly plants and agents. And like the thing I like about Volcanic Heroes is having access to the like Blaze Accelerator. It's gonna let you like, you know, deal with your opponent's boss monsters pretty well, and like you can generate advantage fairly quickly. It's also nice, like Nova Master's good into Tengu, right? Like clear Tengus, draw cards. It's like kind of good. But like we haven't really seen a lot of Volcanic Heroes lately, so it's like kind of tough to like measure. This is Dark Gaia or Evil Hero. I'm just gonna put in spicy but risky. We've seen some Evil Hero decks top in Tengu, and so I'd say it's like probably objectively better than these ones, but yeah, I would say it's like up here with like Mortronics. Like I think it can be good, but I just think it's kind of worse than like general hero stun, so to speak. So we'll kind of go from there. All right, then we have Plasma Heroes. Spicy but risky. Elemental Hero or Destiny Hero Plasma is actually fairly good in like versus agents and stuff. Like being able to turn off their monster effects like a skill drain just for your opponent actually goes kind of crazy versus them. So there is some merit there. And it's kind of just similar to like Evil Hero, right? Like it has its own things it does. It can be a good, but I don't think it's like, you know, I don't think it's like a safe deck. All right, hero stun. So we have two variants. There's like the Chaos Heroes as well as like the hero stun. And I want to make sure I like have it right. I think with the Shining it is hero stun. Yes. Okay, so Shining or like hero stun, I actually think has the potential to be the best deck in the room. Reason for this is, like I said, I talked about with these decks, right? They struggle, like agents really struggles versus effect negation. Plans struggle versus things like Gozen or Rivalry. Heroes can run both, right? They can run things like skill drain. They also can run Gozen fairly easily because 90% of the monsters you're summoning in the deck are going to be light, right? You're going to have Thunder King, Honest, Alias, like those decks or those cards all like easily play under Gozen. And so if you have the ability to lock your opponent out, this is where this deck could actually be really strong. I would almost encourage people to try playing a deck that mains like copies of Skill Drain and Gozen or something like that. Like, I think a build like that has a lot of potential in the meta where everyone's playing plants and agents. And so I think this deck could be one of the best decks in the room for YCS Vegas. On the other side, there's like the Chaos variant, and I think this one is reasonably safe, but I don't think it is nearly as strong as its like hero stun version. Reason for that is because you can't, you know, abuse the main things of like skill drain as well as Gozen in a build like this where you need to run tour guides. So deck's still strong, deck still has potential, and I think it's like reasonably safe. We see variants of like heroes with tour guide all the time, and they tend to do well. So I don't think it's that bad, but I do think this is definitely the better version. Insects, I'm just gonna put mid. Like, hey, ain't no one taking insects anyway, you know. They can run skill drain, which is kind of nice. Like, I think in fact, like the build I have on the website does run skill drain, so I won't put it weak because again, skill drain's pretty good into plants and agents, and like they do run a lot of beaters, so it's not terrible. Like you can also search Max C with the like continuous spell, so like it actually has some merit, like a potential in a meta like, you know, saturated with these two decks. So I'll put it high mid tier, you know, or you know what, spicy but risky. I'm feeling it today, you know. All right, so now we've got, this is Lancer Frogs. And it's tough to place this one. I think it's like very similar to Monarchs. I think I'll put it in potentially strong. Like this deck can perform. We just never see it anymore. Like most people aren't messing with like the frog variants in Tengu format, so we don't really see it all that much. I do think there's merit because Resolving Sea Lancer is pretty strong, and like chaos monsters, so like, you know, BLS in plants or like, you know, BLS in agents or even like Chaos Orc can kind of deal with it fairly nicely, so it's like not great. And also Herald of Orange Light also cooks it pretty hard, so it's like it's okay. Exodia, I'm putting it in mid. Or you know what, my Exodia list that I have on the site, mains skill drain, it's like mains like skill drain, it mains dark bribe, but it has like, it basically just abuses cards that like could slowly get you to Exodia. Agents, like, I mean, they'll probably just side into Decree, so it's like not that great. And I know people are going to see that with like heroes, but you can counter side Decree pretty easily in heroes. It's like obvious it's coming in, so you can side in MSTs. You have triple Gemini Spark, you have answers. As long as you can keep your Floodgate live, then agents are going to have a tough time. So yeah, with this, I think Exodia like has some potential, but it's definitely not as strong as other things. You know, it's just kind of funny. Spicy but risky is the perfect assessment of Exodia. This is like recruiter fairies, kind of similar to what you see in Edison. I just made like a variant of this. I've never seen this deck be played. Like no one has ever tampered with this. I've never seen anyone use it. On paper, it seems like it could be good. Because like if you just crash for, you know, a fairy 3 times, drop Christia, that actually cooks a lot of the decks up here, right? So I don't think it's like terrible, and I actually, you know, I'll put Spicy but risky. Again, I've never seen anyone play it, so it's tough to say. But and like at a certain point you might just be like, well, why not just play agents over this, right? Which is like completely valid. But this is like, I guess with the intention of turboing out Christia, has some creature swap plays. It's kind of cool. Like if you steal your opponent's Hyperion, then you could banish your recruiters in the grave to pop stuff. Kind of unique, kind of cool, but I don't think it's like anything that's gonna be like insane. This is TG. So TG and TG stun, I think these decks are reasonably safe. I mean, the TG version is just like tour guide TG. I've seen some variants like that, and I kind of like that better than like standard TG stun. However, in this format, I think TG stun has a bit more merit because of the fact that like I said, your maining skill drain, I think that has some higher value. So I think these decks are safe. I think these decks can perform very well for you. I don't think they're quite potentially best deck in room, again, because they can't play Rivalry or Gozen. So that's what I think like gatekeeps them a bit. However, with decks like this, you can run things like King Tiger Wangu and you're on Horn of the Phantom Beast. So like if you can get that combo off early, you can cook plants pretty easily with King Tiger Wangu. I mean, King Tiger Wangu actually walls off both normal summons of these decks. And so that's where there's some potential here with these as well. Just a bit more limiting in terms of what you can do and kind of situational to get set up to like cook these decks entirely. So I'll just put them as safe, not quite at the tier where I think heroes are right now. This is Diva Hero. I'm just going to put potentially strong. We've seen Diva Hero perform like variants of it. Absolute Zero is still a very crazy card. And I like it versus agents because, you know, they're forced to like pop it with Hyperion. Then, you know, that's when Absolute Zero can nuke their board and there's some value there. But I don't think it's like anything crazy. Like, again, we don't see it enough to know. Water Synchro is essentially like a different version of Tengu plants that runs like frogs and stuff. I think the deck has performed well when we've seen it played. I think it's reasonably safe, but I don't think it has anything that's like pushing it over or under like plants or agents. Gallus FTK, yeah, this is definitely a thing. I think it's like potentially strong. Like you could full send this deck, like it'll catch people off guard. You can't hand trap it. So it's like if you just FTK people, you're gonna catch them off guard. However, not running spells and traps just seems like, you know, not great. So like if you want to go full monster bash, go for it. I'll put it potentially strong, but I don't think it's like I don't think it's that good compared to like these up here. This is ice barriers. I'm putting ice barriers in mid. I don't think the deck is like turbo weak, but because like it's kind of just like a monarch variant, but I think if I'm putting monarchs in potentially strong, not even up here with these boys, then I think, you know, it's safe to say this is fairly mid. Crusher control. I'll put crusher control potentially strong. We've seen it top historically, like we've seen it top in a few tournaments in Tengu, but I just don't really know how good this deck is into things like agents. Like I feel like it doesn't seem that great into agents. I think it's probably better into plants than agents, and so as a result, I just don't know how much value you're gonna get out of this deck compared to some of these other ones. So yeah, I don't know. I don't think it's that good. Now Gladiator Beast, this is an interesting one. Gladiator Beast, I think I would put at reasonably safe. And the reason for this is we've seen a lot of Gladiator Beast decks that are playing like Di-Fi, so it's like Di-Fi Glads. I think in a meta where everyone is playing plants and agents and you have Di-Fi and you have things like you can, you know, loop your war chariots and stuff like that, I think Gladiator Beasts actually like can function fairly well. The biggest issue they have is like speed. If they like fall behind, they are cooked. Like this deck has to stay up, basically up in tempo, or they lose. And so like there's some risk to it, but I don't think it's like atrociously bad, right? Gadgets, I'm gonna put in potentially strong. We saw Blaze Phoenix top with a gadget list recently. And it was really cool. It was running things like, if you believe, like Vanity's Fiend, it sided into like crusher controls sort of, and yeah, it was just kind of a unique deck. We don't really see it that often, but I do think it has the potential to be strong. So, you know, again, like we've seen it top once, so it has that potential, but we don't really know. So like I wouldn't put it up here with the rest of the boys. This deck, I actually think could be a strong meta call. Like, I don't think it's potentially best deck in the room, but I do think I'll put it in reasonably safe. And this is the, like, Herald of Perfection, like, agent list. Basically, like, you summon Tour Guide, you get the Dijin, and then you can just... You could basically ritual summon Herald of Perfection, and if you get that combo off, it is a win con, especially against these two decks. Like, it is a hard win con. Your opponent can't special summon, and you can negate basically anything they do to try to stop it. Yeah, like most decks in Tengu can't even deal with that. It comes at the consequence of being a bit more bricky than like your traditional plants and agents, but if you have a good run, like, and I think anytime you're like playing in a bigger tournament or a larger scale tournament, you need to have a bit of luck on your side. I think if you're having a good run with this deck could be very, very strong. Ojamas, putting Ojamas in mid. Like, you know, if you really feel like playing Ojamas, go for it, buddy. But I don't think it's not doing you any favors. Now, Infernity, this is actually a deck I've been personally considering playing for the tournament, just because I think that this deck has gotten optimized a lot more. I'm going to put it up in reasonably safe, maybe on the lower end, but we have seen like BS45 optimize this deck quite a bit. And the thing is like, if you can just grind out your opponent and simplify the game state, if this deck combo's off, you win. And so I think there's like a lot of merit to that in terms of, especially when you're not playing against a lot of back row decks. Like I think Infernity tends to struggle versus back row, and if these are like the main decks you're running into, this is where Infernity has a lot of potential to kind of go through, because you don't really care about the interruptions. The biggest threat to your game is going to be like an established Thunder King, which there are outs to. So I think Infernity actually can be pretty good in this tournament. Is it best deck in the room? Probably not, but I think it's like somewhat safe. But it's like, I guess the one like thing I'll say is, if you're not really good at Infernity, or if you don't deeply understand the deck, I wouldn't recommend it, right? Like this deck is tough to pilot. It's tough to pull off. So yeah, that's just something to think about. Karkuri. Now, Karkuri is, I actually am going to put on the highest end of potentially strong. And normally I would put it in the reasonably safe category, but the issue I have with Karkuri is like, so here's the benefits of Karkuri, guys. It is very good versus plants. This deck just beats plants. I don't know why. It just does. You know, it just has good matchups. Like Quick is always live. You like This deck can just do a lot versus plants. It's very explosive and very, very strong as a deck as a whole. The problem I have with it is I feel like its agent matchup is like almost unplayable. Like the reason for that is Herald of Orange Light, like because your deck requires 2 cards to make a play, and you have to like summon and then additional normal and make a synchro, and then that's what's going to start your combo. If they Herald of Orange Light you and you don't have a way to stop that, you probably get blown out and lose right there. Like, it does not feel good. It's really, really hard to make the agent matchup work. And you know, I've done quite a bit of testing on it. Like, the one card I've suggested is like My Body as a Shield. Like, if you're playing Karakuri in this event, I would be maining like triple My Body as a Shield just because of its ability to play around your opponent's Herald of Orange Light. Like, you need that to deal with Orange Light. So that's something to keep in mind. That's something that you should think about. This deck can be safe, like, again, because it's so strong versus plants. It's just kind of like you're taking like a 50-50. If you play against a lot of plants, this deck is going to do you a lot of favors. If you play against a lot of agents, this deck is going to feel pretty rough, in my opinion. So that's just something to keep in mind. Kuraz Field Control, put it in spicy but risky. Like, the deck, you know, we haven't seen it top since Carpath played it that one time. But I do like the style of deck. I think it's kind of cool. It's kind of fun. And it has potential. It does have a lot of basically Tengu Plant 8 engines in it, but I don't think it's like crazy safe like these ones. Chain Burn, I think, is weak. This deck is just really bad in this format, if I'm being honest. Like, I don't know. Like, it's just, it doesn't have the tools to keep up, so to speak. Like, and if you get hit, like, every deck side's Decree, it just doesn't feel good. Malefic. I'm actually going to put Malefic in potentially strong for the same reason that I kind of talked about with Volume Turbo. Viruses and then also skill drain. I think that does give this deck a bit of potential in terms of being able to beat plants and agents. And so for that reason, I think I'll put it in potentially strong. We never really see it played that much, or we don't see it picked up that much. So it's kind of tough to say. Piper Chaos, we've seen some pretty strong variants of this recently, especially like I think Himne's recent build of it was like pretty good. I'm going to put it in reasonably safe. I think if you get a decent Piper variant, like, this deck can just outpace a lot of decks, even plants and agents. It can outpace fairly well. And it also, I believe Himne's build was maining Vanity's Fiend. Again, Vanity's Fiend, very good against these two decks. So it's going to have a lot of potential there. Junk Doppel is, I'll put in potentially strong. I don't think it's necessarily spicy. Like, this deck is strong. It's just so weak to Max C, right? And so that's like its biggest consequence. It's kind of like a faster version of Plant Synchro, where you get like the Librarian Formula combo a bit more consistently. However, it just comes at the cost of, you know, you get duded by Max C, and it feels pretty bad. So Disaster Dragons, or even like just dragons in general. Like, there's a lot of different dragon variants. I'm actually also putting in potentially strong. Reason for this is because I think Quackimiro Drago is one of the best cards in a format where everyone's playing plants and agents. I mean, it's even good against things like heroes, kind of like where they can't really Miracle Fusion under it, for like a Shining, stuff like that. But Quackimiro Drago, like, hard walls off agents and is pretty good at dealing with plants, because plants typically synchro into 5s, which are darks, and so they can't synchro to deal with, to like out your board. So I don't know if like I don't think the build I have on the site is like the correct one, but I think some dragon variant that is just abusing Quackimiro Drago could be the play. Zombies. I think zombies are actually reasonably safe. I think the deck is strong, and you know, Demise King Hades or whatever, or I've revived King Hades. That's what it is. I think it's really good against things like plants, and I like being able to side into zombie world could be pretty good against agents. But even just if you want to go with like using things like I talked about, rivalry would be pretty good. Versus like things like plants and stuff like that. I think it has some potential, and I don't think it's like across the board bad. I think it's just a safe pick. It's like fine. Nordic is going to be the first one where I think it's very strong versus inexperienced players. I talk about this a lot. Like, if people don't know how to play against Nordics, like, you can win a game off of it early. And then if you win a game off of it, like game 1, and they like start to learn and figure out how to beat it, all you have to do is win a game 2 or 3, and the deck like will win you the match. I think that's pretty good, where most people in like the tournament of YCS Vegas probably don't have a ton of experience in Tengu plant format, so they probably don't know how to beat this deck. And so yeah, I think it's pretty strong, or like a semi-decent call if you want to gamble on lack of experience. Cloudian. Cloudian's pretty weak. Wind up, same thing. I mean, these are just kind of like, hey, if we want to find a functional way to play these decks before they have most of their tools. I mean, Cloudian's never really been good, but like this, in this case, it's like, yeah, it's not that great. Like Wind Up still doesn't have any of the cards it needs to be good. It's got Factory, which is something, but you know, yeah, it's not really enough. Skull Servants, I also think is like weak. Just play zombies, man. Gemini, also weak. Fish, spicy but risky. The combo, that goes off like, you know, some like Super Ancient Deep Sea Quellacanth. That card, if it resolves, it can technically potentially win you the game. It sets up a very impressive board. You also get to use cards like Soul Exchange and Econ, which I think is really good to out Christia or like steal your opponent's board and play around it. You can run things like Battle Fader. So I don't think it's like atrocious. I don't think it's terrible, but I don't think it's like that good, right? Like, put it maybe above Insects. Oopsie, we have 2 Infernities in here. Gigavice. It's seeing success in Edison, but I think it is at best spicy but risky. It's, you know, you don't have double Lone Fire. I think it's like fairly weaker than, you know, just Tengu plants in general. And like, it's also pretty weak into Maxi. So it's like a cool deck, but I don't think it's like crazy. 6 Samurai. I think in this format, it is, I almost want to put it mid. We'll put, I mean, I really can't even justify the issue with 6 Samurai, and this is my problem, is it like it plays to turn off spells and traps, right? Turning off spells and traps is pretty good, and it's like semi-effective. The issue is like plants and agents, everything's running tour guide. They all have outs to the Xian, right? Like they all have ways to deal with it, and you don't really have a way to prevent these guys from playing the game. Like, you know, if you're mostly looking to turn off spells and traps, you can maybe run like Vanity's Emptiness and go with like some strategy like that where you like make a Xian and then Vanity's Emptiness and try to like protect it. But there's just so many liabilities to prevent, to like play around that. Like, I don't know, it just doesn't, yeah, it just doesn't feel very strong in this meta, especially. I guess I'll put spicy but risky. Maybe you can come up with a good build for it that like will prove me wrong, but I don't know. I just think this deck is so weak in this format exactly. TG Agents I think is reasonably safe. I actually think there could be like a really solid TG Agent variant that like might even be better than like standard agents. However, I haven't like tested it enough to know. So, but I do think this deck is good. I think it's strong. I think like it needs to be a bit more modernized, but like TG Striker with Venus is just so broken. It's so good. Dark Dragon. This deck is, I'll put spicy but risky. Like, I actually think this deck is kind of fun. I think it's like not terrible, but the issue is like you run so many risks, and like even if you like get their hand out with the Norealis or whatever, like their top decks that your opponent has in that situation, like even if you're 1 card above, if they top like a Hyperion, it can kind of cook you. So I don't know. I don't think it's like that good. I think it's okay. Gate Heroes. I think it might be strong versus inexperience. I think if you don't know what to do against Gate Heroes and you're not prepared to deal with it, Gate Heroes like has one of the nastiest combos in Tengu format. Like it sets up a very powerful board that most of these decks can't keep up with. And so I think that this deck actually has a decent chunk of potential, but I'd say it's like overall just weaker than, again, like standard heroes. Flamvel, I'm putting it next to Flamvel Soren. They're one and the same. They're not that good. Let's see. This is Mech Lords. Mech Lords is pretty... I'll put it spicy but risky. Like, I did show, like, my updated, like, Mech Lord Karakuri build. I think that deck is, like, kind of cool. I don't think it's, like, strong, like, insanely strong, but it's probably better than, like, some of the decks down here. All right. Gravekeepers is my other potential best deck in the room. I think Gravekeepers is already very strong against things like Agents. Having access to Royal Tribute is very good against decks like Agents, especially if we're expecting to see a ton of them. This deck gains a lot of value. It also can very easily side into Rivalry Gozen, could even main a copy or two of those. Same thing, like kind of similarly with Heroes. This is where I think a proper build of Gravekeepers could be the best deck in the room. I think it could be very strong. You just have to be wary of, like, again, the counter side of, like, going into Decree, stuff like that. That's what you need to be wary of with, like, this deck. So just keep that in mind. But for the most part, I think this deck actually does have a lot of merit, like filling the conditions of, like, it has the tools, I think, to beat both of these decks very nicely. Unicorn Control. This is kind of like a Cat Sith variant, but it's more focused around, like, Fabled Unicorn. I actually think it's, like, reasonably safe. I think Unicorn variants or Cat Sith variants are, like, generally, like, kind of generically strong. They almost feel like Tengu plants in a way where, like, they're, like, just kind of good, you know? Like, they don't feel like they're insane versus anything or incredibly weak versus anything. They just feel, like, decent. I'd say they're weak to Gravekeepers, but in this meta, where, like, we're mostly going to see these two, I think the deck gains some value and can be pretty good. Spellcasters. I'm putting Spellcasters potentially strong. I kind of like this deck. It can main deck Kaiku, which can really hurt things like Agents. It has, like, you know, you get Secret Village of the Spellcasters with some back row. Your opponent, you know, like, your opponent doesn't really have an option. The only, like, Agents actually don't really have an out to Secret Village of the Spellcasters because they don't run any Spellcasters since they're on Orange Light. Plans have exactly, like, I mean, you potentially Chaos Sork, right? But that's like pretty deep in. And plans have exactly, like, they can normal summon Valor and do it. Like, obviously Agents can, like, summon Hyperion, but, like, again, if we're playing under Kaiku, stuff like that, it could be good. It could be strong. You know, I have always liked this deck. I think it has a lot of potential. It's kind of just like a Chaos deck that has some control to it. Not terrible. I think it is worth considering. Potentially, you know, yeah, potentially strong. Let's see. This is Archfiends. I think this deck is pretty mid. A lot of things have to line up for this deck to work. It's just weaker than most variants. Dragoonity, I'm gonna put it in strong versus inexperienced. Not like necessarily because it's strong versus inexperienced, but it's strong for the inexperienced player. I think if you don't know much about Tengu format, like, and you don't think you're going to be able to outwit people, because a lot of Tengu plant format is knowing your matchups and stuff like that. This is a really easy way to focus on what your opponent's doing and focus on like your own game, like, you know, focus on what your opponent's doing and try to figure out how to counteract it, because every turn you're doing the same thing. Like, there's not a lot of thought that goes into your play, and so the nice thing for this is you can kind of focus on dealing with what your opponent's doing. I think the deck is decently strong. Last YCS Vegas, I played my, like, Cat Sith Dragoonity list at, like, one of the pods, and I got second place, so not terrible. You know, like, I do think this deck can be pretty good. You could almost put it in reasonably safe. In fact, I think I will. I'll put it up to reasonably safe. I do think it's just good if you lack knowledge of the format but want something that you think could be strong to play. I would heavily recommend this deck. I think it's good. Fortune Ladies. I hate to put you mid, but I gotta put you mid, you know. I love this deck. It's cool. It draws a lot of cards. It's pretty fun. But I don't think it's like anything crazy. X Sabers. So this is for Decree Sabers. We have standard X Sabers and Decree Sabers. I actually think Decree Sabers is on the weaker side in this tournament because it's just plants and agents. So Decree loses value. So it's actually better to play traps in this tournament, I think. So I'll put Decree Sabers potentially strong because I do think the deck is still good. It's just, I don't like, I think if you're running into a lot of plants and agents, like, then you're better off like playing a different variant. However, trap sabers I think are reasonably safe. We just saw X sabers win a Tengu Mania, and I think that's, you know, like, or win a recent Tengu Mania, or the most recent Tengu Mania we had. I think X sabers have a lot of potential because they can also run things like Gozen. They could main deck Gozen. I saw a deck in Italy main deck Gozen versus, you know, like, and take first place because it was, you know, against plants and stuff. And I think that's pretty good because plants, again, cannot play under Gozen. So I think this deck can be pretty good. It's just finding a balance between having, like, favoring your matchup versus plants and then also being able to beat agents simultaneously. The nice thing about it is it's like one of the only decks that has access to a hand loop. So if you can get to a position where you're able to resolve combo, you can hand loop agents and they basically can't come back from that. So this is where I think X Sabers does have a lot of merit. Moja, it's pretty mid, you know. It's what it is. It's not that good. It's cool. I'd love to see someone try to play it, but I don't think it's like anything crazy good. Fabled, I'm gonna put it's high-end, spicy but risky. We saw it actually do well at Tengu Worlds and even qualify for Worlds last year. The deck is very explosive. Obviously, it's very weak to Max C, but it does have some pretty crazy combos that can just win the game fairly quickly. I do think this is probably the most spicy but risky deck. You know, like, it can be very strong. And like I said, the fact that it made it, like, this made it further in last year's Worlds than Plants and Agents did, just so we're clear. So that's something to think about with, like, Fabled. I think Fabled is kind of good. It's just, I think it has the same problem. You know, actually, if we're putting Junk Doppel potentially strong, we'll put Fabled potentially strong, right? Like, it has the potential to be good, maybe even more so than Junk Doppel. But, yeah, it does just come with that risk of Max C, just hurts it a little bit, or a lot. So, yeah, it's not ideal. Cloudian Synchro, I'm actually going to put in potentially strong. Reason for this is because it can actually run Christia, which is obviously very good against plants and agents. I've also tampered with this a bit with, like, Duloran and stuff like that. It's kind of just like its own Tengu plant variant that also gets to run Christia, which I think has some merit. But I don't think it's, like, reasonably safe, so to speak. But I do think the deck has potential. All right, so this is Pure Mist Valley. Again, potentially strong. We saw it actually, like, I think it was like got top 4 or even win a tournament last year. I can't remember. But like Pure Mist Valley actually has some nasty combos, and it's like decently powerful. I just don't know how, like, you know, I don't think it has a lot of merit versus exactly plants and agents. I think it could just be potentially strong, and, you know, someone can prove me wrong. But yeah. All right, let's see. We've got Psychics. And honestly, this is gonna be a crazy one, guys. This is gonna be some drama. Okay, I'm putting Psychics potentially strong as well. We haven't really seen a lot of Psychic players recently. The deck is almost like falling off a bit. Someone can prove me wrong again, because like I do think this deck has all the qualities and potential to be strong. However, I think it might just get outpaced if the meta is strictly plants and agents. It is very floaty. It does have really cool combos and plays. But I'm just not really sure where to place it, just because we haven't really seen it very much. Most people haven't really been messing with Psychics. Battery Man, fairly mid. And there's not really much to explain with that. That's just kind of how it is. Scraps, I'm actually going to put... I'll actually put it strong versus inexperienced. We have seen Scraps top. We actually saw Scraps recently top. And so I don't think the deck is weak. I don't know how necessarily safe it is. You could probably make the claim that it's safe, but I think its biggest quality that makes it good is it's pretty good against inexperienced players, right? The nice thing about it is if they warning your Scrap Dragon and they don't know the Scrap Dragon float effect, you're going to blow a lot of people out with that. And I think that's where it gains, like, I guess that tier of, like, it's being strong versus inexperienced versus just, like, strictly safe. And so, yeah, I think that's a fair placement for it. Jurak is also fairly strong versus inexperienced players. I think, like, this deck can actually blow people out pretty easily. And it also has a pretty good Tengu plant matchup. Like, it's actually really strong into Tengu plants. It's just how it deals with the agent matchup. which, like, honestly, the deck makes Trish so easily, and things like Mistworm and stuff, it can kind of blow agents out too. Like, and like the fact that it's on things like Shrink and it's like Shrink and like Lance and stuff. You have ways to attack over and out Christia. Also has a great leeching the light side into agents. So I actually think this deck is somewhat safe, but also very strong versus inexperienced players. If they don't know how to deal with Jirax, they will get blown out by Jirax. Like, Jirax actually has a decent chunk of potential in the format. I do think this deck is strong. Macro variants. This is... I'm going to put it potentially strong, and I think it's on the higher tier of potentially strong. Reason for that is I think that obviously Macrocosmos is very, very good against plants and agents, and we've seen some like really spicy like Grand Modulus for it. Like, the deck's getting more optimized, and so I think this could be a decent meta call versus plants and agents. So I think that, like, it's not a terrible idea if you want to like try for it. Spaceships is going to be pretty weak. I don't even think it's mid. I think it's weak. Just doesn't really have a lot of tools. Like, it only has one honest. It basically wins off of honest or limiter removal, and that's about as far as it goes. Machina, I'll put it next to gadgets. Potentially strong. If you can find a good Machina build, maybe. Because, like, honestly, Machina's not bad against, or like Machina Fortress isn't super bad against Hyperion, because if they have to target to pop it, like, then you get to take a card out of their hand, which is really good, or they, you know, kill it, and then you get to kill their Hyperion if they like swing over it by battle. So there's some merit to it. With like maybe as a more control variant deck, this could have potential. Kind of going back to even like, I think I made a list a while back ago that was like maining like Thunder Kings, a Machina engine, as well as like a small Ancient Gear engine with like Ancient Gear Beast. And I felt like that wasn't bad versus like, again, the plant meta, stuff like that. Something like that could be good. Now, Falcon Punch, this is another one. I think, honestly, I would say if they're strong versus inexperienced, they're also reasonably safe. But I think Falcon Punch is very strong versus inexperienced players. If you don't know how to beat it or what it's doing, this deck will just clean you out. Like, this deck will absolutely destroy you. But I also think this deck is very strong in the Tengu Plant format meta. And so I think it like kind of doubles in both, where I think it's a reasonably safe deck to take and it's strong versus inexperienced. This is also a very good deck to take to the tournament, in my opinion, because of those two factors, right? I think it's like, if you opt to side into the Quackimiro Drago engine, kind of like what Himne did to like win Worlds, that's a really good way to counteract the agent matchup. The issue is like, I think the agent matchup in game one is kind of weak, so there's a little risk there. Again, if most of what you're seeing are exactly these two decks, but it still can function, still very powerful. I think it's actually really good into Tengu Plants itself. So yeah, I think this deck is a great meta call for the tournament. Watts, or like Watt Lock, I'm gonna put it pretty mid. I mean, I think it's weak. I don't know. I don't think it's very good. It's a gimmick, and if it doesn't work, it doesn't work, right? Like, it's not gonna happen. Counter Fairies. I actually am moving Counter Fairies down to mid. The issue with it is this match, like, a friend of mine and I tested this a lot because we thought like Counter Fairies had some potential. The problem with it is its agent matchup is abysmal. It just does not beat agents. Agents cook Counter Fairies, at least with how it's built on the website, where you're using like the field spell, stuff like that. It's really bad into agents because they get access to all their like, you know, their Earths could search Hyperion. You might have to come up with a different way to approach the deck, but I just think it's only strong going first, and it's kind of weak as a whole. So yeah, I wouldn't mess with it. Volcanics, also fairly mid. I would say that the deck has some kind of cool combos, some cool loops, and there's not a lot of restriction that like would prevent this deck from going off with these two decks. So it could maybe work, but I mean, it's not anything fancy. Worms, I think, are reasonably safe. I'm a big fan of this deck. I think this deck is actually pretty good in the format. You're basically kind of playing on the high roll of like, do I see W Nebula Meteorite? If you resolve this card, it blows out anything. Like, in reality, like, it just blows out most decks again. And if we're playing a tournament to be with the intent of having a bit of luck on our side, that's how you're gonna top. I would say that this is going to be a decent meta call for you. I don't think it's terrible. Also has a great side or main into like Fossil Dyna, because you can use W Nebula Meteorite to like flip to blow up their special summon monsters and prevent any further special summoning. It's really great if they're going for like a Tengu Synchro combo. So I think this deck has a lot of merit. I think it is very strong in the format. I think this could be worth a try. So again, reasonably safe for me. Rock Stun, I think, is potentially strong. Again, you get access to Fossil Dyna. I made an updated list for this, and the list really doesn't feel that bad. Abusing Gigantes with Tour Guide. It has a lot of plays. You can loop Fossil Dyna with like Leviair, Tour Guide, Gigantes, stuff like that. And so like always having access to Fossil Dyna lets you play through, make like aggressive pushes and play through Gores and Trag. And I think that is very, very good. All right, Dragon Turbo. This deck, I actually think, is potentially strong, and it's on the higher end as well. Reason for this is because, again, we talked about Quackimiro Drago, decks that can abuse that. This deck goes so fast and overwhelms so quickly that there's actually some merit, especially if you're not playing against a lot of back row decks that are going to like interrupt your plays. These decks don't really do that all that much, and so you have access to kind of just blow out your opponent fairly quickly. And so I think Dragon Turbo actually has decent merit in this tournament. I don't know if it's like safe because it is very glass cannon, but if you get going, it's not a bad call. All right, Gen X. I'm actually going to add Gen X to the strong versus inexperienced category. We saw James Arc pilot this deck, take it to a top 4. I think there is some strength to it. I think that, you know, like if you guys watch my video where he actually taught me through it, if you can resolve your combo, you're probably going to win the game, you know, and I think that's pretty good. And I think that's something that can catch a lot of people off guard if they haven't played against the deck. They're not going to really know what to interrupt, what to stop, and they're not going to know you're on like Ultimate Offering. Like, they're not going to have a clue what's going on, right? Most people haven't seen the deck. Most people don't know how it works. And so I would say this is a like potentially strong meta call if you can, you know, optimize it down. Again, just because I think inexperienced players won't know how to play against it, and you can catch some people off guard. All right, Cat Sith variants. So this is just like Cat Sith Chaos. I think like last YCS Vegas, someone went undefeated, like literally 9-0. Like their team didn't make Top Cut, but they went 9-0 with Cat Sith Chaos. So I don't think you could consider this deck not safe, right? Like I think this deck is, again, I put it like I mentioned with like Unicorn Control. I put it similarly to like Tengu Plants, where it's just generically across the board, decent into most decks, has a lot of play potential into most decks. And so I think this deck could be just a good meta call if that's something you want to go for. You know, I don't think it's a bad deck at all. And the last one, which I'm going to put in spicy but risky, is Arcada Force. This is like a weird build I threw together, which basically could play to like OTK with Arcada Force the World. It's super fun, it's super funny, and it actually can win games. Like, just even if you don't resolve the combo, it can win some games. I've like done things with like Dark Arm Dragon. There's like synchro combos in it. It's not atrocious. Most people probably have never tried it and never will. But if you want to play something kind of fun that'll like tilt people, this is that deck. Like, this deck is really cool. So definitely a spicy but risky, but I don't think it's anything deeper than that. But I think that is where everything is going to be placed, guys. Like, hopefully this gives you a good idea of what is going to be going on at YCS Vegas. Like I said, for the most part, you're going to see these two things going on. Like, people are going to be on Plants and Agents. So this is where some of these other decks could like go up in value. Like I said, I think Heroes and Gravekeepers actually have a lot of potential if you can build them correctly and build them right. I think there is a lot of merit to these two decks. But other than that, I think that is going to wrap it up for this video. Hopefully I can get more content out to you guys soon. I'm obviously very busy with like CLOL schedule and stuff like that as well, with like what I do for the universities and stuff like that. So my personal work is getting in the way a bit of content, but I will try to keep up with it. Let me know in the comments what you guys think about this tier list, what you guys think about the decks listed in this. If there's something I underrated or overrated, please let me know. But other than that, we are just going to give a quick shout out to my patrons. So shout out to Eric Gagnon, Slap God, My Dude, Photo Shooty, and Brian Ford. Thank you guys so much for the support. But other than that, thanks so much for watching. Make sure you guys like, comment, subscribe, and have a great time doing today.